Welcome to the FileMaker user group meeting for January 2016. This is FM Pug Without Borders. Hello everyone, and thanks for attending. This is Richard Carlton. I'm a senior engineer and CEO of RC Consulting and also a trainer at learningfilemaker.com. Every month I coordinate with FileMaker corporate staff to determine if we should do a live broadcast at the DIG FM meeting in Santa Clara, California. Sometimes FileMaker wants us to broadcast from that user group meeting, and some months it doesn't really make sense to do so. This month we are not at FMI, but we are at our studio at learningfilemaker.com in Santa Clara, California. Now, this month's topic is on FileMaker iOS App SDK. Now, joining me for this broadcast is Todd Geist, CEO and owner of Geist Interactive, based in Los Angeles, California. Now, the FileMaker iOS App SDK tool has kind of been almost a stealth launch from FileMaker Incorporated. It's been kind of flying under the radar, and it was actually even alluded to at the keynote address at the Developers Conference this past year. And this is really a huge deal for the FileMaker community, to actually be able to use FileMaker to build native iOS applications.
Yeah, it's a big deal. We've been waiting for this for a long time to kind of make FileMaker Go and FileMaker apps really on the same par as other native iOS applications.
Yeah, this is really a huge deal, and I think a lot of people don't even gather how big of an announcement that this tool is. It's really a huge deal. So what is the FileMaker iOS App SDK? Well, this is a tool made available from FileMaker Incorporated that provides a method to compile an FMP12 file, that's a FileMaker app, into a native iOS application. So that really says it all right there in one sentence. But what's important for everyone to understand is that as I have been talking to FileMaker users and to people interested in this technology, what I found out is that we have groups of people coming to this webinar today who are existing FileMaker developers and who want to know more about building a native iOS app, and that's why they're here. And what we're seeing is a good number of people who are coming to this webinar who are expressing an interest because they are existing Xcode developers and they are not necessarily familiar with FileMaker. They've heard about it, but they're not really a FileMaker development company. And they are looking for potentially easier ways of coding and building apps and getting those apps submitted to Apple. And what's interesting about it is that FileMaker provides the UI as well as a tightly integrated database engine, and that's what has their interest. So let's cover the agenda real quick for this webinar. It's about 90 minutes in length, that's our plan. And during this webinar, we're going to be demoing the basic build process of taking a FileMaker app, running it through this FileMaker iOS App SDK with Xcode, and building out an executable application right in front of you. Now, there are a couple moving parts here, so that'll take a little bit of effort right there. Additionally, we're going to spend a lot of time discussing data management strategies. This is super important. And Todd has brought a lot of expertise regarding data management to this conversation, and I'm so thrilled that he's here with us today. And then along the way, as you type questions in, we're going to be answering those questions. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that this topic is fairly expansive, and 90 minutes is not going to be necessarily enough for you to learn everything you need to learn. So that's why I want to point to you real quick to a video course that we are producing right now, and you can purchase right now at learningfilemaker.com. Now, this video course is 5 to 7 hours in total length as we finish it up. It's in production as we speak. And once again, myself and Todd Geist are the presenters in this video course where we get to drill down deeper into the moving parts of the FileMaker iOS App SDK. So feel free to visit learningfilemaker.com if you're interested in getting more of a substantial education. So let's cover some low-hanging fruit as part of this conversation first. What can the iOS App SDK do? Well, an application that's created from the iOS App SDK only has the features of FileMaker Go. The SDK itself, when used with Xcode, will create a native iOS application. And that application will have at least a single bundled FMP12 file with it. Now this slide I wasn't going to have in here, but I realized that it wasn't obvious to a lot of people. And that is that I started getting questions earlier in the day about, well, can this native iOS app directly communicate with iOS calendar, or directly communicate with the reminders, or tap into the notification system that's part of the iOS? And what's really important to understand is that the features that are part of an iOS App SDK are the same features in FileMaker Go. So currently at this time, FileMaker Go does not support direct hooks to notifications. It doesn't support direct hooks to the calendar or to the reminders, for example. And so the iOS App SDK won't do that either. This iOS App SDK, which you'll start to hear us refer to as FIAS, as an acronym, is actually the database engine of FileMaker Go bundled with at least a single FMP12 file. And that's the fundamental tenet here that everyone needs to get their head wrapped around. So what can you do with a native iOS app? Well, it's important to understand that you can, of course, you're going to build the app and it's going to run on your iPad or iPhone. And then once you have the app built and you're happy with it, you can deliver it to Apple. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's the initial handoff to Apple. Once Apple has it, then you can really do one of three things, or I guess all three things. And that is you submit to Apple for review for distribution through TestFlight. Now, TestFlight is Apple's beta test service, which is effectively free for you to use, and it allows you to connect internal and external beta testers to test your application. You can also submit to Apple for review for distribution through MDM, and that's Mobile Device Management. Now, this is where you might have a larger organization with several hundred or more employees, and that results in several hundred devices. And if you want to push out an application out to your enterprise, well, through MDM, you can effectively set up your own Apple Store per se, and that allows your employees to download approved applications or specialty applications that maybe the IT department there has created for that enterprise. So you could submit to Apple for review and distribution through MDM as well. Now, FileMaker has an obvious interest in the MDM component because that's where they see a lot of the FileMaker developers supporting the larger customers. And once again, a native iOS application, this FIAS app that you're going to build with a FileMaker iOS App SDK, can actually connect to a FileMaker server. And of course, that connection to the FileMaker server requires an available connection license. So there's a cost in terms of having our mobile application connect to a FileMaker server. It's exactly the same for FileMaker Go. And of course, that licensing model carries through to our new FIAS application. Now, lastly, you can also submit to Apple for review for distribution through the public App Store. This is the App Store that everyone thinks about. It's where you find Angry Birds, Flappy Birds, all sorts of birds. So understand that there are really three directions that you can go here with your submission to Apple. Now, the next set of questions, we've received a bunch of these, so we're covering all this kind of information. How much is the FileMaker iOS App SDK? Now, it's important to understand that this is a free tool. It's not an official product. If you go to FileMaker's website and you look at their list of products, this is not a listed product. However, it is a free tool for the developer community, and you have access to it as long as you're part of FileMaker's developer subscription program. Now, this was formerly called TechNet. It's $99 a year, and it includes other things as well besides the FIAS tool. Now, you're also going to need Xcode. Now, Xcode is free, but it only runs on a Macintosh. Now, I guess I should mention this right here up front. That is a couple things. First off, if you're going to build an app and try to submit it for an iOS device, which is an Apple device, and you're going to Apple to distribute this, then it probably makes sense that you're going to need to use a Macintosh to code the app and to submit it to Apple. And that's just the way it is. Xcode is Macintosh only. I have received a couple emails from people who were bummed that it required a Macintosh. I don't know what to say about that. Now, the other thing I should mention here, I guess, at this point, so I can answer this question up front, is that I am not aware of any plans for FileMaker to bring this App SDK to the Android platform. It should be obvious that FileMaker Inc. is really part of Apple, and Apple has a vested interest in supporting iOS and not necessarily competing products. So as a result, I wouldn't expect to see any sort of App SDK available for FileMaker on the Android platform. Now, the last thing you're going to need is a subscription to Apple's developer program. So we have the FileMaker developer program at the top, there also is an Apple developer program. Now, I've been building apps for upwards of 5 years, and we've always used the $99 program. But there also is the $299 a year program, and that's specific to the enterprise folks who want to get into that MDM or mobile device management stuff. So understand that you're going to need access to the Apple developer program as well if you want to submit the application anywhere. Xcode is free and it allows you to build the app on your device and maybe a couple devices to test. But for broad beta testing or for submission to MDM or the App Store, you have to be in Apple's developer program. So the next thing I think I should answer is, where does the FileMaker iOS App SDK fit relative to the other FileMaker products? Now, if you're a longtime FileMaker user, you know this already. But if you're evaluating the FileMaker platform because you're an Xcode developer or a Swift jockey or someone who codes in a different platform, and you're evaluating FileMaker, then this section of information is really for you. First off, it's important to understand is that you're going to do your development in FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Pro Advanced. In fact, inside FileMaker Pro and Pro Advanced is a script workspace that looks a lot like Xcode. In fact, you can see where that was inspired. FileMaker Pro Advanced has some additional features, which are nice if you're a developer. It also costs more money. So if we're doing our development in Pro and Pro Advanced, then we do our testing in FileMaker Go. And FileMaker Go is the native client for the iPhone and iPad. This is the product that's been out for years that FileMaker continues to upgrade. But this is where you're going to want to test how your FileMaker app behaves on an iPhone or iPad. You're not really going to want to test it in FIAS until you think it's pretty far along and about ready. My suggestion to strategy is do your development, do your testing in FileMaker Go. Now, during the course of this webinar, we're also going to talk about hosting your FileMaker app on a server. And the product for that is FileMaker Server. So FileMaker Server doesn't provide access, but it hosts out to either Pro users or Go users. So understand that's important. So where does the FileMaker iOS App SDK fit? Well, it effectively takes your FileMaker Go engine and bundles it with your FileMaker file. And with this bundled file, which becomes an IPA file, you can actually deploy that to iTunes Connect. And once again, that's after you finish building it with Pro and testing it with Go, which hopefully that makes sense for everyone. So that takes care of our perfunctory PowerPoint presentation. At this point, we're going to go ahead and build an iOS application from scratch right in front of your eyes. And there are a couple moving parts here. Now, this window right here that you see is actually the screen of my iPad, so it's available when we need to connect and test. But the first thing we need to do is to go into our browser and connect to developer.apple.com. And this gives us access to the Member Center up here in the upper right-hand corner. And from the Member Center, we're going to need to log in with the Apple ID that we used to purchase our annual developer account with Apple. That makes sense, the $99 a year program. So this is our username and password for that. We log in. We see these items here. The one item that we need to do before we start building an app is create a new Apple ID. So we're going to click here on the left. So now we drop into the website. I'm going to click over on identifiers and Apple IDs. I'm going to press the button to create a new app ID. Effectively, what we're doing is we're notifying Apple that we're creating this application, and this system, this Member Center system here, will actually communicate with Xcode on our Macintosh. So there's like this two-way communication going on. So I'm going to press the plus button. I see the name of the application, so we're going to go ahead and put that in. We're going to notice that there's the Apple ID prefix, which is the first part of the Apple ID. That's that item there, where it says Team ID. Next, we see the Apple ID suffix. This is really important. FIAS applications require the use of an explicit Apple ID. And the reason for that is that during the compiling process or the build process, we're going to need to turn on data protection and iCloud. These are both Apple services. We have to turn these on in order for the compile process to work correctly. Now, you can't use a wildcard App ID if you're going to be using Apple services. So we're going to go ahead and click down here into the bundle ID and set this up. Now, this is a reverse DNS, so it's going to be com.rcconsulting, and then we put dot and then the app name. So that's that format you see right there. The next thing we do is we come down here to App Services, and we turn on Data Protection, Complete protection. That is the hardware level encryption on the iPhones and iPads. It's completely automatic. We check it off and it works. Then we check off iCloud and we get that turned on as well. Now, it's important to understand that because I've turned on iCloud does not mean that we have access to that in our FileMaker application. It's just something that's required by FIAS during the build process. The next thing we do is we continue, we get a summary of everything, and we go down to the bottom and say done. Next, we notice that we have our webinar test application all set up here and ready to go. Now we're done with the Member Center. Next thing we're going to want to do is actually create the project directory. And to do that, we have to fire up the terminal on our Macintosh. Now, when you download the FileMaker iOS App SDK, it's effectively a zip file. You're going to download that file, you're going to unzip it, and when you open it up, you're going to get something that looks a lot like this right here. The folder will have the app resources in it. It will have the legal license that you'll need. It'll also have this make project directory, which is effectively a batch file. But these other folders in here are projects that we've already been building on and working on. So FIAS 14 and Pro 14 and Git function, those are all things that I created. So you won't have those. So what we need to do is use this make project directory to create the Xcode file that will have the FileMaker Go engine built into it and actually allow Xcode to create the compiled application. So what we have to do is / make project directory. And the next thing we need to do is specify the name of our application as well as the directory name that we're going to use. So when we run this command, it's actually going to create the folder with all the necessary files in it for us. We also have to put in our bundle ID. So the com.rcconsulting.webinartest, that is the bundle ID that we set up at the Member Center at Apple just a minute ago. So we need to put that in here as well. So when this runs, it will include all that information as part of the build process. So this is going to be kind of the first build process. So I press return, and so it starts to run. Now I have an i5 Mac here, about 12 gigs of RAM, and a solid state drive. So it's pretty quick. It's not instantaneous, but it's plenty fast for what we need. This batch file is actually creating the project folder for us. If you look over here on the left, we see the new folder called Webinar Test. And that is the folder that was just created by the make project directory command. So at this point, I can close the command line. We're totally done with that, and we won't need to go back to that at all, which is nice. So I'm going to click on that, open this up. So FIAS is effectively this make project directory batch file, and by running it, it effectively gave birth to this directory with all these things in it. And the actual Xcode project is this item right here. That's the Xcode file that we'll fire up in just a second. So let me go ahead and double click this and fire this up. So after a moment, Xcode spins up. I'm going to go ahead and turn the folder icon down here. We see the things inside, and we can actually dive in and see the FileMaker file that's kind of pre-set up to be part of this generic application at this point. And FileMaker sets this up. So if I turn down the solution file folder, we see placeholder.fmp12. This is FileMaker's pre-canned little blank FileMaker file that we're going to switch out with the application that we want to bundle as part of our new application. So once again, that make project directory built this whole folder for us right here, including building the solution folder and putting this little FileMaker file in here. So that's really slick, because otherwise we'd have to do this ourselves. And of course, once again, our placeholder file is in here to show us where our file goes, but this placeholder is blank. It doesn't do anything. So this is where we have to have at least a single required local bundled file that's part of this solution. Now keep in mind, if you have a 20 or 30 file solution, then that can all be dropped in here. That's not a problem at all. In fact, I know that during early testing of this product, they dropped in gigabytes of data in here, and that worked just fine. Now, for the point of this conversation, just understand that I prefer to build solutions as single files unless I have a compelling reason to break things out. But for the most part, I like to build single file solutions that keeps things nice and clean and easy to manage. So I'm going to drag in a different file here. This is a training file that we have, and I'm going to drop it in here in an effort to replace the little blank placeholder file. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is take the placeholder file out of here and drag it out, so only my file is in here. Now the next thing is to click on the config file.txt right here. And there's really three important settings in here. The top one is the name of the file that we're putting in there. So placeholder is not going to be there anymore. We have a new file name. We're going to copy this real quick and then come back over here and paste it in. The next thing to notice is that there is a URL if we want to have a help website that this system references automatically. So FileMaker was putting together, this would be FileMaker.com/help or something. In our case, it's learningFileMaker.com/help whatever. I don't have a help page set up, so I'm going to leave it generically here like that. One thing to understand is that if you don't put a URL in here, then the help icon will not be visible when you compile your application. So this last section here is really important, and I guess at this point we need to start talking about strategy of how we're going to be doing data management with this application, which is a super important conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, we should start to set the stage, I guess. I mean, the instructions are pretty much right there, that if you set the next flag always overwrite to 1, then every time the application is launched, it's actually going to copy the files over from the application bundle into the place where they're actually opened, I guess is a way to put it. And so there's always like two copies of your solution. There's like the bundle that gets installed on the device, and then when it gets launched for the first time, the assets get copied over into the document directory, and this config right here determines whether or not that will happen every time you launch the app. I guess that's one thing to say about that is launching the app in this is a little different than what we're used to. Is that really the only time it launches is after you have, some people think of as force quitting or swiping up. You close the app by actually swiping up on the device. Then when you open, that will be considered a relaunch. Otherwise, the app is pretty much always open.
So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 0 for now. So the FileMaker file that we have bundled here will not be written into the documents directory, and I think that's kind of important to understand here, is that that's what's happening, is that we're talking about the FIAS application writing a copy of the bundled file into the documents directory. The copy that's in the documents directory is the copy that FIAS uses. So it's important to understand when FIAS will overwrite that file. If we set it to not overwrite, then it will only write it in there when it first starts up, or if for some reason the file's not there. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on now. We need to set up the artwork for this application. And so, of course, there's a button here that we can click and we start to load the artwork in here. Now, what's interesting about this is that with all the plethora of iOS devices, it's almost become kind of marginal insanity trying to get all your artwork straightened out for this, because we have older, low-resolution iPads, we have high-resolution iPads, we have the iPad Pro, and then, of course, we have that all replicated with the iPhones, iPhones 5s and 6s, etc. So we need to get all the artwork here, at least the minimum artwork that we need. In this case, we're going to try to make just an iPad application, so I don't really need all the iPhone artwork, but just keep in mind that we're going to need all different sizes. Now, what was that application, Todd? I'm trying to remember the application we used to automatically create these images for us. Here's what we're going to do. After this webinar is over, we're going to make this webinar available on the internet to everyone. We're also going to email out a link to a zip file which contains all the samples that you're going to see us demo here in this webinar. In that zip file, I'm also going to put a link to a website that will help you automatically create these images for you very rapidly. Now, besides the icons that we need, we also have the launch image. This is the image that will be displayed as our FIAS application is booting. So it's spinning up, it's just kind of loading itself in the memory. The startup script and the database are not even running yet. So before they start running, this splash screen is displayed. Once the boot process is complete and the database starts to run, this screen will fade out and you'll start to see the layouts. We also have the obscure icon or obscure artwork. And this is where if our application is reconnecting say for example it's gone to sleep in the background, or we've hibernated it for one reason or the other, and it's spinning back up, you are likely to see this obscure icon to cover over the screen as everything is reconnecting. So this can be different artwork. It could even say, hey, I'm reconnecting, please stand by. So once we're done setting up the artwork, we can come back here, click on our Xcode document at the top, and I can press just the build button here for fun, and yeah, we got an error here. And this is because we haven't set up our provisioning profile, and we need to go ahead and do that. So we got to get the provisioning file and the development certificate downloaded to this copy of Xcode running on this Macintosh before we can continue. So you're seeing this demo live with all the stops and starts that you're likely to experience yourself. So I'm going to click over here into Preferences and in Xcode, click over to my account, and it's important to understand that I need to, let's see, take a look here. I need to reset my signing identities up here at the top is what I think I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and press this button here to reset, and there you go. We get a fresh downloads from the Member Center up on Apple's website down to our copy of Xcode, including all the provisioning files that we need. So I'm not going to dig into the provisioning profile right now because really that's another longer conversation. It's another area that we dive into in greater detail in our video training course. What's important to understand about the signing certificates and the provisioning is that Apple wants to make sure that we are who we say we are. And this gets interesting only from the standpoint that, you know, I've been doing development for a while and I have multiple accounts for different projects with Apple. And you got to make sure that as you're building an app with one account, you don't try to work on it in Xcode in a different account, because that will cause problems. So I'm going to go ahead and press done here, actually close this, because I think we're all set here. And then also right here, we're going to specify the correct account to use once again for this application build. And that gets back to this idea that you have to keep all your ducks lined up in a row. You can't build an application with one account and then magically edit it with a different account. Apple won't allow for that. It's important to understand you can have multiple accounts, but you just have to keep everything straight as you're building with this application. Now, all these settings that you see on here are specific to this webinar test application. If we opened a different file, which you'll see later, then we could actually run that with a different account if we want to. Once we set this, it will be saved as part of our webinar test Xcode project file. So let's go ahead and set our device for iPad. So we're going to keep this simple. We're not going to try to do the iPhone. Also understand down here the device orientation is largely going away because Apple's going to be requiring apps can properly rotate from portrait to landscape and back again. And so while this is a limiter right here, this may cause problems with an iOS 9 application. It's kind of a legacy setting that we have here. And my understanding, at some point this will probably go away, even though it's still being displayed here from FileMaker. So of course, what's interesting about this is that you're going to have layouts that are smart enough to be able to handle both portrait or landscape, or you detect in your FileMaker solution that it is rotated and you switch layouts. Somewhere I was seeing a survey just recently that 93% of iOS users or iPad users, whatever it was, were using their mobile devices in a portrait mode. And as a longtime database FileMaker developer, we normally build things in landscape on the Mac and Windows. So for us to be running around thinking about portrait, it's a different mindset. It's not necessarily something that I am comfortable with, right? Building applications or databases more in a vertical format. So just keep in mind that FileMaker is going to have to be able to automatically switch on the fly, and that going forward, you really can't restrict this. So just leave this alone and leave these all on at this point. So the next thing we need to do is go ahead and press the Capabilities tab at the top. And down here we have Data Protection, and we need to go ahead and enable that. So once again, I'm going to mention right here, it's really important that you see all these other capabilities. You see push notifications and in-app purchases and all these other, frankly, cool capabilities. This first release of the FileMaker iOS App SDK will not allow FileMaker to leverage those. In fact, it doesn't allow you to leverage any built-in libraries, or if you write a block of code with Swift or something that's part of Xcode, you can't use anything in FileMaker to talk to that. If you would like to see that included in a future release of FIAS, drop a note to FileMaker. Go on to their suggestion form and let them know what you would like to see, because they're definitely listening and they want to make this as cool as possible. And so, if you think that would be useful, let them know. Now we're going to go ahead and click on the Info tab at the top of the screen. And once again, we're going to come over here to our launch solution placeholder right here. And of course, it's no longer placeholder, so we need to put our actual FileMaker file in here that we're bundling. And if we have multiple FileMaker files that we're bundling, this would be the main launcher sort of FileMaker file, if that makes sense. So if we only have one, then this is the one. But if we have 20 or 30, this would be the main one that would boot everything else as necessary. And then down here we have URL types, and we have to press the plus button. And this is really important right here. I'm going to go ahead and put our bundle identifier back in here one more time, and this is com.rcconsulting.webinar_test. Todd, you have some feedback here.
Yeah, so if you're going to be using FMP URL protocol in any of your applications, whether to call scripts or to open files or to have other applications call into your app, you can't use the FMP URL protocol because that belongs to FileMaker Go. So you have to come up with your own here. And that's really what you do. The only thing you have to add is just the URL scheme. You just have to come up with something for that. And you should come up with something that is unique. And that will replace, instead of FMP, you're just going to use that instead. So it'll be FMP, instead of FMP : / it'll be RCC webinar test : //
Yeah, exactly. So cool. I think we're just about good to go here. Let me check here, make sure we have everything. In fact, we always got to make sure we follow the checklist here, because FileMaker has provided a very explicit checklist from their website. And in fact, we'll include the important links in a FAQ links file that we'll include with our zip samples that we're going to send out to everyone. So that way, in case you don't have this checklist, you can get this. So the next thing I want to do is, I think we're about ready to build, but I need to specify the build target. Right here, I can look at the different simulators that we can fire up. So these are iOS device simulators that pop up on screen. In my case, I've actually have my real iPad Air here connected. I'm going to specify the target for that. I'm going to press play to compile it, but I get my error message, so I'm going to have it try to fix it. And whoa, that works. It's going. So it's compiling right now. It's putting a copy of the engine together along with our bundled FileMaker file and rolling it all together. And then it's going to download it and load it into my device. And we'll see that pop up here momentarily. It'll actually pop up and then automatically boot into that. And there it goes. So after a moment, it will start. And there you go. You see our launch splash screen. And then once FileMaker starts running, you'll see it fire into the layout for the FileMaker application. And here you go. And yeah, and so this is a copy of our Pro training course, Pro 14 training course. And you can see that it's based in FileMaker. And on the left here, I can click on these items in the portal and then watch the videos on the right side. Now, what's important to note up here at the top, and it's kind of interesting, is this little power button that we have up here in the top left. And this concept I'm about to lay on everyone here is really important. What it is that it's, I guess, in some ways more handy for a FileMaker Go when you run this in FileMaker Go, but it allows you to close this application or close this database and exit out the Launch Center that's part of FileMaker Go. And what's interesting about this with FIAS, the really important concept here is that FIAS doesn't have a launch center. There's no area where you can go and say, hey, let's open this file up or let's go and visit this server. One of the critical rules of FIAS is that it always has to be running a database. Whether it's running the bundled database or it's running a connected database somewhere else, it has to be running a database. And so if you get to a situation where all the database is closed, FIAS goes, whoa, timeout. I have to be running a database, so it goes back to its default behavior, which is to boot the bundled database file, which is that file that you saw back when we were doing Xcode. And so I'm going to press this button right here, and you'll see this. And there it goes, and then it comes back. And it's important to understand that this button right here, all it does is executes the exit application script step. That's part of FileMaker's scripting language, or coding language, if you will. So we're not allowed to actually quit all the databases. FIAS sees that, it automatically reboots the default bundled application. So it's a really, really important concept to learn, and it's a behavioral difference change from regular FileMaker Go. So the file it's telling to boot is this one that we have over here in Xcode. Once again, this is the one that we bundled. So I click on the project and go to the config file, and that's the file right here that it has to boot automatically when it gets unhappy because it has to be running something. It's always going to go back here and spin this up. And so this gets into one of those critical moments now. It's exciting because we're learning all sorts of new stuff here, but this is one of those critical moments where we have to decide, where does the data live? It's a larger strategic question as you're going to build a FIAS application. Where does the database live? What's it doing? Where is it at? And where does the data live? So of course, at this point, we start to get into this idea of where does the data live? Now this application right here, this video player application, this is effectively a utility application. And so we're really not storing any user data in it. And so let me give you a little bit of background in here, and this is part of this strategic conversation about where does your data live. And I have some relevant experience here that you'll find, I guess, maybe somewhat entertaining. Back about 5 years ago, right when FileMaker Go first came out, my organization was involved with building a CRM for the iPad. That was a free solution. And this application was built using Xcode and SQLite. That was all part of the iOS. And customers would get this and use this, and we're storing data. It was a local solution. It was not a hosted solution. It wasn't on a server. It was a very, actually, frankly, kind of a popular little CRM that ran in their iPad. And the problem is that I assume that, people would get the solution, they would run on their iPad, of course, being responsible adults, that they would back up their iPads, etc. Except that's not the case. It's not the world we live in. And so there's this general assumption that if I install and use an application on my iPhone or iPad, that someone will magically take care of me under all sorts of emergencies and all sorts of disaster recovery type situations. And what I'm talking about is people got the CRM, they're loading data into it, hundreds, thousands of records of important information, and then they destroy their iPad. One guy, they called me, he left the iPad in the taxi. Another guy left it in the hotel room. This happened over and over and over again, and those devices were gone forever. And the plan that we had was for people to restore from a backup, except no one ran the backup. No one connected to iTunes with the plug and ran the backup. And so there was no restoration, no plan to get their data back. And so that is really problematic. These people would call me in tears, desperately hoping that I could magically beam their data from their device up to the cloud and back to a new phone or pad that they had purchased. And so this gets into this idea that if you're going to build an app, is it a utility app? That's a really simple application. It might have great value, but we're not storing critical data in it. So if they lose it, they can reinstall it. There's no downside. If there's actually local data in it, then you need to come up with a way to protect people from themselves. There is an expectation that you're going to babysit their application. So even if they do stupid things, you're still going to help them out of a jam when it all goes badly for them. Let me run one more demo that'll help frame this conversation pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and dive back into Xcode. So I got my iPad right here. So everyone's familiar with the idea in FileMaker that you have a launcher file or an opener file. This is a file that can go out and connect to a FileMaker server and open a database that's running on the server. And if a database is running on a server, it's protected, it's backed up. Generally, it's going to be pretty easy to have a disaster recovery plan. And so let me show you that a launcher file that we wired up into a FIAS app that simply launches a database running on a FileMaker server. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go into Xcode. I'm going to close this existing webinar test file, and I'm going to find this launcher sample file. demo, open recent. Oh, there we go. Well, launch demo right there. .xcode. So it's another Xcode project. It's completely set up with its own bundle ID. So it's a completely separate project right here. And notice what we've done in this file is we've removed the placeholder file and we built and put in a launcher file. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and go into the solution and double click and fire it up in the FileMaker so you can see actually its native behavior in FileMaker Pro. So I can't seem to find it here, so let me go ahead and do this. This is kind of cool. I can click on the file, right click, and say show in Finder, which is kind of handy. And there we go. All right, cool. Double click. Now what you're going to see is a simple little launcher file opener, and it will automatically run a startup script that will attempt to connect to this FileMaker server. So in this case, it's opening a new version of FM Starting Point that we're going to ship out here in a couple weeks. This is a completely free CRM, very popular. That's a totally separate conversation. But you can see that it fires this up automatically, and this is running from the FileMaker server. It's not locally installed on the FIAS application. So to be clear, the database and the data live on the server where it's protected, yet we're building a FIAS application that we're going to deploy out to MDM or the Apple Store. So this makes for a great example of booting into a solution where the data is not local on the device. So I'm going to go ahead and quit FileMaker here, go back to Xcode, and I'm going to set the target for my iPad, and we're going to run the compile process here, and it's going to start building it. I'll bring up my iPad so we can see this, and you'll see the app install, and then we'll auto start. And you can see we recycled the artwork here. Now this thing is spinning up just like it did in FileMaker Pro, and it's connecting to the FileMaker server. Now it's important to understand here that we have to have an available connection license on the FileMaker server. That's something that you have to pay for as part of your FileMaker server license. So you have to have available slots for your FileMaker Go users, and of course those slots are also going to be used for FIAS applications as well. Now, it's important to note at this point that just like the security systems in FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Go, it's going to ask for the username and password to access this database system. And so we can go ahead and put in my new amazing, totally secret password in here. And then also, what's cool here, and this was a new feature as part of FileMaker Go 14, is this save and keychain. So going forward, I won't have to put the password in again. It will save it automatically. So after a short moment, it starts to boot up the application off the server. It's asking me to approve the use of the GPS functionality. And we use that for the mapping in the CRM. I'm just going to say, OK, allow that. And so there you go. So now we've launched from our launcher or opener file into a hosted solution on FileMaker Server. So this is just like FileMaker Go, the behavior here. The data lives on the FileMaker server. It's protected there. There's a lot of good things to like about this model. And with FileMaker Server, you have the automatic backups. You have the robustness there. So you don't end up hosing yourself if someone loses the iPad. There's a lot to like about this model, but it doesn't serve you well if you have to take your iPad offline and take it with you, and you don't have a Wi-Fi connection, you don't have 3G or even LTE or anything. So there may be some issues with that. So at this point, we bring Todd more into the conversation with some more advanced kinds of demos, which is really his forte. Todd is an absolute expert at Geist Interactive, and he's got some good demos for us here.
Yeah, right. So I've got this launcher file running in an iPad simulator here. I just built it right out of Xcode, and this is the project that I'm running. And so our launcher file is what you see here. And what I've got here is this button that says File Reference. And really all that means is that we're going to open the file on the server with a file reference or external data source, right? So we know what that is. It's the usual thing how we connect files. And that means that our file opened on the server is hard-coded to whatever file reference we put into the launcher. And that works, and that could be appropriate for certain scenarios. You can see we've opened up the file right off the server. It's this projects file that one of the starter kits, one of the starters that comes with FileMaker. So that works. There's absolutely no problem with doing that, except for
if you need to change servers, then you're going to need to recompile your app and send it out through MDM or through the Apple App Store. And if you want people to be able to connect to different servers, you got a problem, right? So because you can only connect with a file reference to one server. So, but there's another option. We can use the FMP URL protocol to connect to a server and to open a file just using the open URL script step. And in that case, what we do is we calculate up the name of the URL or the address of the server and its file name that we want to open, and we just use OpenURL to open it. And so we've got that set up here, and the cool thing here is I can enter a URL into a field, or an address into a field, and then I can just press this button and we'll open that file again. But now this is not a hard-coded reference to the server. It is dictated by a field. And so just to kind of dive into that, it's pretty cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah. To dive into how simple that is, we're really talking about a single calculation where we're calculating up the URL, and then it's a string, and then we just use the open URL script step to do that. And to examine this calculation a little deeper, we have the URL, which is stored in a field, or the address that's stored in a field. Now, you could do this any way you want, right? Just the point is this is a FileMaker calc, so any way that you can calculate up the server address for your server is valid. And then to open the projects file, we finish that with /projects.fmp12. And then at the beginning, I've got this custom function that is filling in the URL, what's called the URL scheme. And the reason we do that is because in FileMaker Go, we would just need to do this, right? We would just use FMP, and that would work. But FileMaker Go owns the FMP URL protocol, so we can't use that. So we have to come up with our own. And so the way I just abstracted that away is just to simply use a custom function where I can enter whatever I want it to be my scheme. So that is just a custom function here in custom functions. And you can see I'm using FMP right now because it's on the simulator. There's no chance of a collision. But if I want to make sure that there's no collision, I need to go to my Xcode and I need to put in something. Looks like I've been doing that here. So here is a URL scheme, a long one that I've put in com.geistinteractive.gozinc. And the reason I'm doing that again is because I want to make sure this is unique. So the URL schemes is found on the Info tab, and it's under this disclosure thing called URL types. Once I have that, I can then go back to my FileMaker, and I can plop that in there, and that becomes my URL type. And so that would be what ends up going
in there.
Right here, basically.
Well, and one of the problems with hard coding the server, I mean, you pointed out that if the server name changes, then you have to reissue the file and rebuild the compile and submit. But, some people are looking at, well, what if I want to build a solution that goes out to the App Store publicly? If it's hard coded, then, you might have millions and millions of people looking at this application. But if they all, if FileMaker Server can't handle millions and millions of people simultaneously, it can only handle up to 100 FileMaker Go or FIAS users simultaneously. So you would instantly, you would instantly overload the FileMaker Server by hard coding the destination, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, and also, if you have a vertical market, like I think I mentioned, vertical market solution, and you want to be able to point your app that's in the App Store to any server, and then this is a way to do it.
This is super cool, and I had never thought of using the URL protocol as part of a launcher file, but it totally simplifies the support and it keeps it from being broke. Because if you have to communicate with people, you tell them, hey, this is the new server address, and they just put it in.
Yep.
Wow, great, excellent demo.
All right. Okay, so we just looked at using the launcher file to open up a file that's on the server. We looked at doing that with just an external data source, just opening that file with the open file script step. And we looked at using the URL to open a file, and that gave us some flexibility as to being able to open the file on any server that we pointed at. Well, what I want to talk about next is there are times when you want to install files on the device itself. You might be doing data separation where you want the local UI file to be on the device and you want that file to be pointed at a server and get its data from a data file on a server. Or you might need it to work offline and if without an internet connection or with bad internet connections. And if that's the case, you're going to need to have files on the device. And you're going to have some strategy for syncing or backing up or something like that. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But first I want to talk about just getting files on and off the device. Because if we use the method that is provided for us by the iOS application SDK or by the App Store update process and the MDM update process, then our updates are under the control of the operating system, basically. If a person has their application set or their iPhone or iPad to set to automatically update, those updates will happen whenever they do, and they'll just install new files into that device, and you may not have any way to determine whether or not it's a good time to do that. So any files that you put in the solution files folder will be managed by that process, by the App Store process, the update process. And you may not want that. You may want to be able to manage that update process yourself or that syncing process yourself so that you can make sure that your devices, that it's appropriate. Now is the right time to update and doesn't squash data or kill things like that. So I want to show just how easy that is to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up that same projects file that we were looking at, but we're going to actually install it locally on the device. So if I go to this demo here, I've got a button here that just shows local files here. And all that's going to do is show a dialog that lists the files in the documents directory using the get document listing function that's available in FileMaker. And that just prints out, basically gives you just a list of all the files. And it gives you their complete path, and that's why it's such a long name here. But you can see at the end it says launcher. So that's our launcher file. And I've got up top, it just says local file count. So this will enable us to determine whether or not we've installed the file correctly on our device. So we're going to do that same file that we were looking at before, the projects file. And how we're doing that is I've got a file up on my server that is, I just call installer. And let me open that up. And in there we've got basically just a container field, and in that container field is my projects file. So I just dragged it right in there. That's all I did. I didn't do anything else, and it's just sitting there in a container field. And when I press this button here, we're going to install that file onto our device, and so there it is. So, cool.
That is super cool. Like,
yeah.
Amazingly cool.
And so just to make sure that everybody believes me that it's on the device, we'll run the show local files button, and you can see now the projects file is in fact on the device. We've got local file count 2. And so so that's it. The file is installed on the device, and let me just show you how easy it is. The installation process is pretty simple. We run a script, a button runs a script, which calls a script in the installer file, and really it's just this. It's 3 script steps, and one of them is close file. So first we calculate the path, the export path, which is file : and then we are using get as text to, actually we don't need to do that, but I like to be explicit, get as text around the container field, and that will just give us projects.fmp12. So our full export path is file : projects.fmp12. And then when we export that to, you want to?
Yeah, but I got a question though. I mean,
sure.
Do we not specify the full path here, or
we don't need to? This is one of the nice things about working in Go, is because Go only has a couple directories we have access to, and the default directory where everything is the documents directory.
So if you don't specify the directory explicitly in Go, it's going to default to documents.
That's correct.
Whoa, cool.
Yep, very cool. That's all you got to do, and then so we specify our target is just that, the container field. The contents is the container field, and the output file is our export path, and then we just say automatically open file, and that opens the file for us. That's it. It's 2 script steps, and it will install a file locally on your device. And now that is a script, so it is under your control as a developer. You can determine whether or not it's a good time to update the files and not have to depend on the iOS to update it, the iOS operating system to update it whenever it feels like it.
Yeah,
so that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm getting a messaging here. People are asking questions here, and they're asking. They want to make sure they get a copy of this file. So we're going to take all these sample files and bundle them up into a zip and make them available.
That's correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So the next question that comes up pretty quickly is, okay, we can get our files on there, but how do I back them up or get them off? Because we want to be able to do that too. We want to be able to make sure that people can get their data off of their device in one form or another. We're going to show a very simple backup mechanism here. So in the installer file, I've got another layout. And when I switch to this layout, there's going to be a field I need to delete. So edit this part out. Not that one. We're going to go to the backups layout. So edit this.
Okay, cut out. Okay.
All right, so on the backup layout, we really just have an empty container field. It just is a backup. It's just its name. I've got a last backup timestamp. Actually, it says timestamp there. It's kind of funny. That basically just all it does is auto-enter the timestamp when this field is modified. So what we're going to do is from our installer down here, our launcher file, we've got the file locally on the device. The user can make all their changes, do whatever they want, and we're going to show here a very easy way to send that file up to the server. So to do that, I'm going to open up the launcher file in Pro so we can look at the scripts. Take a look at how that's done. So here's the backup script. Wow. Again, very simple, not a lot going on here. We want to make sure that we close the file that's installed on the device first. We don't want to send up one that's not closed. And all we do is we use the insert file script step to insert the projects.fmp12. Again, we can just use that relative path, and it's going to assume the documents directory. And we're going to put it into this container field. And that container field for this script step to work, it does need to be on the layout. So you're going to want to have that container field sort of off screen somewhere, like I got there. And then we just pass it up using a script parameter. And I wrap it in a base64 encode. Don't need to, but there's a little trick I want to do at the end, so I'm doing that. And that's just going to turn it into a string. Take it from a binary file, turn it into a string, and then we call a script back up from in our installer. And that script is also very, very simple. All we do is we get the script parameter into a file. And actually, let me start that over. We don't need this there.
Okay.
All right, so edit that. All we do is we get the script parameter into a variable called file. And then we use the base64 decode to write that into our container field. And then when we use base64 decode, it gives us an opportunity to rename the file. So our file was called projects, but now we can rename it as projects backup if we want. And since that's a calculation, we could include things like, we could say get timestamp in there, for example. So we could make this work any way that we wanted and give it a name that was sort of appropriate for, when this actually happened. Get current timestamp. There it is. So we could put that in there. And then that would now include the timestamp in. So it's really nice. It's an easy way to rename a file as we insert it into the...
This is absolutely huge, because we've had conversations previously about strategy and being able to create a backup process for users to get them off the device up to at least some secure location like a FileMaker server. That's really a big deal.
It is, and so let's just run that script and we'll watch it happen. So here is close the script so we can have our windows up. And actually, that's the FileMaker Pro one. I don't need that. Let's get the device. There's our simulator, and there's our backup layout there. So we'll go to backup, and we're going to run that.
So
and there it is. Boom.
The iPad simulator on the left just backed up through the internet to the FileMaker server, a local file.
That's right. I pushed it up. My server's running in a data center in downtown LA. And of course, this would work anywhere. So I've just backed it up off the device into a container field on my server.
Yeah, people are clapping. I'm getting actually somebody actually said clapping. They said clapping in the messaging on the webinar. So awesome. That is super cool. Super cool stuff.
Yep. So that kind of lays the groundwork or the basics for the launcher file technique, which is that that launcher file can really all it needs to do is just at the very minimum launch something, and it can be your files on the server, it can be a local file, and it can also manage installing that local file. But if you keep it focused on the launcher file really only being like your controller thing, and you do all of your application and logic in other files, either installed or running on a server, it'll really make it easier for you.
Wow, great demo, Todd.
All right.
I've got some people asking questions about what if they need, more robust, data exchange back and forth.
Yeah.
I guess if you build an app and they go out into the desert with it, I mean, we get back into this conversation about sync, right? Is it even practical to use sync with the new FIAS application?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think that's a really good point. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. This is FileMaker Go. So if you were using a sync solution with FileMaker Go, you're going to be able to use it with the iOS application SDK. And as an example of that, we can show GoSync. So GoSync is our sync solution that was put out by Xcode and Geist Interactive. It's a collaboration between the two of us. And it was the first commercially available sync solution for FileMaker Go and FileMaker. And it's been in market, I think, for close to 5 years now. So it's this icon here on the iPad. We get this nice, beautiful icon that John designed over at Xcode. And this is, let me open up the app on the server so you can see some data up there. That's our hosted file. And so this is a pretty simple demo. We've got these are work orders. We've got 4 work orders that are ready to be synced out. So they're scheduled for the day. So our field worker is going to sync and pull down these 4 work orders down into the device. And then these work orders will be moved out of scheduled into checkout, signaling to people on the server side, the office side, that these work orders have been picked up by the device. So we can do that. Oh, I'm using always do that. And we can sync. And there we go. I got to remember to push on the iPad screen and not the cursor. So they were pulling down those four orders, and you can see that they've now been moved to checked out here in our hosted solution. So so this is GoSync, and GoSync is syncing the data back and forth, and we can make changes like, there I go again, pushing with the keyboard. I can say testing new data. I can't stop doing it. Testing new data. There we go. So now we've got a little bit of a change there, and I can sync that and push it up to the server, and there you can see that now that says testing new data. The sync is awesome and it works really well. One of the cool things about it is that one of the reasons why you want to have control over the process of installing, and GoSync does do that. So we're going to look at how we can send out a new update. This is just using with the regular GoSync stuff. So people who have GoSync are very familiar with this process. So this is my mobile file, and I'm opening it in FileMaker Pro Advanced, and I want to send out a new version of this file. So I want to make some changes to this file and send it out. And I'm going to make this really simple and just make a duplicate of the button, so we can tell that this file is different than our file. Where's my reflector? Then different than this file. All right, so there's only one button. There's our 2 buttons. All right, so now I'm gonna send this up to the server, and you can imagine kind of what we're doing. You've seen some of what we've done under the hood with the earlier stuff I showed. But now we're doing some more sophisticated things. We're tracking version numbers so that the clients can know whether or not the version is actually a new version and whether or not they should upload it or they should download it. So we're going to upload those to the server, and it's making compressed copies. We're also making nice compressed copies, and we're attaching build numbers to them, and putting those up into our GoZync hosted server side files. And let's see, I can get rid of those. We don't need those now. I can go back to the iPad and I want to do something. Before we do that, I want to make a change. Let's change this same thing. We'll push it back. And okay, so we've made a change to this record. Now, if I check for updates now, right, if we weren't careful about this, there's a new version of this Works mobile file ready to come down. And if we're not careful about this, it would just overwrite the database, and I would lose the change that I just made. Now, maybe one field, not a big deal, but imagine I've entered 10 or 20 records, I've made a whole bunch of changes, and if I check for updates and I get a new update, I could lose all that information. So instead, we have a system built in where we can actually say, hey, wait a second, you have not moved the data from this device up onto the server yet. You've made changes that need to go. So we're going to do that first. We'll sync. And now that's pushing up the change. And now that data has been moved up to the server. And now if I check for updates, we're going to get that there's 2 updates available. I'm going to install them. And it's going to come here and eventually reboot my files right back up. And you can see now we have the 2 buttons. So we have done an update from our our local files, our development files. We've changed them. We've pushed them up to our server running in Los Angeles, and then we've automatically installed them, but safely installed them without overwriting our data onto our device.
What's important for everyone to understand is that you can, and someone's asking us the question here during the webinar that. Can I write my own sync with scripts? And of course, we were talking earlier about how I did a basic import one way or the other way. Just to share this story is that I have a very senior engineer, really sharp guy, and they've used sync before from GoZync and various other products. And what ended up happening is that they decided about 6 months ago that they had a customer solution, and they figured it would just be easier for them to build their own sync. And he's a sharp guy. I figured he could do it. It wouldn't be a problem. So I let him do it. He ended up spending more time than he estimated. He ended up working on the project for free for the customer to get it done. And when he was done writing his own sync, he swore he would never do it again, that he would always rather use a product like GoZync because he didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. And he was cocky as hell initially. And then towards the end of the process, he was humbled to a great degree by the complexity of what it takes to build a true sync that works uphill and downhill, and it's got good performance. And so it's not my product. I don't make money on GoZync, but I wanted to share this experience that yes, with a scripting interface in FileMaker, you too can write your own sync engine. But the question is, do you want to, and do you have enough experience to really make it work well? And in my case, we worked well, but my engineer, frankly, we lost, he didn't make as much money on the project as he wanted to, and he ended up working more extra hours. So just as a explanation is that even if you're the most smartest person in the world, you still may not want to roll your own sync code, right? And that's where GoZync comes in, and it's great. So Todd, question about that. What's the pricing on this product?
Well, it starts from as low as $498 for just a couple of client connections, and it goes on up for $3,000. You get unlimited connections. So like an App Store kind of solution, it'd be $3,000.
All right. Well, we talked about and we've seen how this setup is done, but skeptical people are going to want to know how hard is it really to roll this into a iOS app if they're they want to use your product. I mean, what's the level of difficulty here?
Well, so the good news is if you're already using GoZync, and if you're using a current version of GoZync, GoZync 5, there will be a couple of minor changes that you need to make to your solution. and you'll get a launcher file, special launcher file like we've been talking about, that is pre-integrated with those changes. So if you're using GoZync 5, it literally it's just not going to take you very long to do, because it's just, I think we changed 3 or 4 scripts, a couple of custom functions, and that's it. And then you'll just be able to do this. If you're not yet using GoZync, then you'll have to do the GoZync integration first, and that depends on how many tables and files and things you're trying to sync. But it's not too tough. It doesn't take very long to get a couple tables set up and syncing. And the good news is that you can do all that setup with FileMaker Go. You don't have to worry about the iOS App SDK or any of that. Just get GoZync to work with your solution, and then it'll be seriously a snap to get it to work with the iOS App SDK. And then if you're on an older version of GoZync 4, you will need to upgrade. You will need to upgrade to GoZync 5. There is an upgrade cost, but it's not too bad.
Well, we're bumping up against the end of our allotted time here for this webinar. Well, Todd, I really appreciate you coming to this webinar. It was a great team effort, and we have over 400 people here. This is very exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting stuff. I'm really, really glad that we can finally have actual native apps, and we're really thrilled at how well GoZync is working in this new environment.
Yeah, I think it's commonly, with some people, you ask them, they think this is important. This product announcement from FileMaker, the FileMaker iOS App SDK, is probably one of the biggest announcements, I think, probably since FileMaker Go. I think it's potentially that big. I know each of the products in its own way is an incremental improvement, but this is an area where FileMaker is now able to say, yes, we can do it, and not, no, we can't. And that is mentally a huge deal for people. They know they're not boxed in to not being able to make an app. Everyone wants to be able to make an app for that, right? So this is a huge deal. It really, really is. And some people go, well, I don't know if it's that important. This is very important. It's a big to the community. It really is.
It's a big deal, definitely.
And so I guess it goes without saying that this year at the FileMaker Developers Conference, I suspect this topic is going to be a hot item, really a hot item. And people are going to want to talk about this. There'll be probably sessions on it. I don't know what session is going to be there, but I suspect that this is a more technical process with rolling your own application with FIAS, that I expect that DevCon will be the place to be in July, which is Las Vegas once again, and a crazy hotel, which is a Cosmopolitan. So I'm going to recommend people come to that. And with that, I think we're done with the webinar. So I appreciate it, Todd. Thank you.
Thank you.